Hello and welcome back to Knitting Nicely. Today we're going to talk about the difference between knitting very tightly and fighting with that yarn and knitting loosely and letting the yarn just rest on your needles. So here we go. Okay, so here I have some knitting done on my needles, and I'm going to show you the difference between knitting super tightly and fighting with your stitches, and whereas the difference between doing that and knitting it loosely and letting it just rest. All of these stitches are just resting on my needle. See how they just slip back and forth really easily? Especially on a metal needle, they should just slip back and forth really well. Now if you're using a wooden or bamboo, sometimes plastic can be a little bit sticky, then it might not slide as easily, but it still should be quite easy to move your stitches across that needle. Now I'm going to do some stitches that are really tight, and this often happens when you're beginning knitting and you're holding your tension a little bit too tight. I normally knit with my left hand around the yarn, so I'm going to show you that, what it looks like. So here I'm pulling my yarn super tight, and you see how it's really hard for me to get this right hand needle underneath into that stitch. It's a real struggle and a fight. And then I wrap it around super tight, and then I pull it super tightly on that needle, and then I go to the next one and I pull it, pull, because I'm stressed and I'm working these needles really hard, and this yarn is just super tight against my needles. Ugh. Okay? See how it's just really, really tight on those needles. And I'm pulling that yarn because I'm feeling stressed and I gotta get this knitting done. Ugh. And I don't really know exactly what I'm doing, so I'm trying to, hold everything so tightly, and my hands are shaking because it's so tight. Okay, now see how these needles, these stitches, they're not slipping on that needle. Even though this is a metal needle, I have to really pull to get them to move, okay? And if you're working with a bamboo or a wooden needle, it's not gonna budge. Okay, so now I'm gonna try to go back into those needles. I would normally be going all the way across the row, but just for this example, I'll show you how hard it is to get back into those stitches, okay? I'm gonna try to get this needle back into that stitch. See how hard it is for me to push this needle into that stitch? It's really tough. And sometimes, depending on your yarn, your yarn might even split into two as you're trying to get that needle in. Okay, and then it's really hard to get it through to get that next stitch on and slip the old one off. See that? Ugh. It's hard to get that needle in. I am struggling with it. You can see my hands shaking, and it's not fun because I'm struggling so hard to push that needle in. And then I try to get this around it, and it's just a huge struggle to get that. See, did you hear that snap? That was my needle snapping together because this stitch is so tight against my needle. And I have to really struggle to get that through, okay? Now let me show you the difference between that type of knitting and a more relaxed, in my opinion, more fun way to knit. Okay, so I'm going to go on with this row, but I'm going to use a more loose, letting the needles rest against my needle instead of pulling them so tightly. So I've got the yarn kind of loose in my hand. I do have it anchored on my pinky so that it's not too loose. I wrap it around my pinky once, and then around my forefinger once. So it's not super tight, but I'm able to, pull it a little if I need to, okay? And then I'm ready to do a knit stitch. So I'm putting my needle into that stitch, and I'm just wrapping it around so it's resting on the needle. Not pulled tight, just resting. And then I pull that stitch through. It should not be a struggle. It should just slide right on through. And then when you go to do your next one, don't pull on the yarn. Just let it rest on that needle. It should be snug against it. It shouldn't be like this. Okay, you don't want a loose stitch like this, because that'll change your gauge. Your gauge will be a lot bigger than it's supposed to be. You want it to be just snug against the needle. See that? It's just resting on the needle. Think of the needle as sort of a guide for you to make your stitches the right circumference, so that your gauge turns out to be the right gauge on your knitting pattern. Okay, and if you pull it too tight, then the circumference is going to be too small. If you let it too loose, so the circumference of that stitch is going to be too big. So that needle is just a guide to keep your stitches all the same size. And you just want it resting on that needle. Okay, I'll do it again. So I'm just holding it loose. See how loose my yarn is? And I grab it with my right hand needle. Sometimes I use my forefinger to pull that through. And it's just an easy slide. Okay? That's the right kind of tension you should have on your yarn. It should just rest against your needle. It should not be a struggle. It should be relaxing. Knitting should be a relaxing thing, not a fight. Okay? And then you just keep on going. Now I'm going to turn it around and let you see how easy it is to go through those nice, quote-unquote, loose. They're not really loose. They're just resting stitches. Okay, let's turn it around. Let's see. Okay, so now I've got my nice resting stitches. And look, you can even see the difference between the nice resting stitches. They're even fatter because they haven't been pulled super tight like these ones. Okay? Okay, so then we're going to go through and do this. See how easy it is for me to push my needle through and then pull up a new stitch? There's no struggle there. It's just, in fact, you can even see a little tiny hole right there where you can put your right hand needle in. And it just slips right in, and you can pull your next stitch up and slip that old one off. Very easy, very relaxing. And as you practice more and more, you will get used to it and it will just become second nature. Your hand muscles will get stronger. There'll be muscle memory happening in your hands so that you can look away. Some people like to watch TV while they knit and they don't even look down at their work. They just do it by what it feels like. I actually know some people who are blind and knit blind, and they do a really good job. So knitting, it should be a relaxing thing. It's a relaxing hobby, not a stressful hobby. It's something that you should enjoy doing and have fun with. So I hope you enjoyed learning the difference, and I hope you can put it into practice. Happy knitting!